Welcome once again to another episode of What Happened, the show where it's finally time to answer the question, what happened to Asura's Wrath? During the 7th generation of console game development, games continued to grow in scope and complexity, and likewise, available staff got stretched thinner and thinner. Like several publishers at the time, Capcom decided to reach out to international studios to work on some of their legendary IPs and, several new ones. In the past, we've spoken a lot about Keiji Inafune and his push to collaborate with those Western studios, but we have yet to touch upon those teams from Capcom's home country. To name a few, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was primarily handled by Aiding of Bloody Roar fame. DBZ Budokai developers DIMS made up the bulk of the staff who developed Street Fighter 4, and even From Software themselves made 2 Monster Hunter spin-off titles, as well as one more game that I will poke fun at later. Capcom, therefore, were not strangers to hiring outside help from other Japanese studios if they needed it, and during this time they arguably worked with the most they ever had in their entire history. So it wasn't out of step for them when they also started speaking with CyberConnect 2, who were best known for a number of Naruto games and the Hack series, about making a brand new IP that would leverage the power of 7th gen hardware.
$599.
The project seemed to have begun sometime in 2007 and was to be handled primarily by CyberConnect 2, with Capcom acting strictly as the publisher, and it started off not with a specific hook or gameplay gimmick, but rather an emotion. After mulling around various ideas, they decided to settle on Wrath. Why is that? Because it was the style at the time. CyberConnect 2's president/CEO, Hiroshi Matsuyama, thankfully explained a little more eloquently in an interview with IGN Australia. Our main concept was that we wanted to reach out to audiences all over the world with Asura's Wrath. That's why we focused on Wrath as our main concept. It's something that anybody can relate to. It's an emotion that's very powerful. It's sometimes seen as negative, but it can be a driving force that helps you overcome any obstacle. Once the principal emotion was chosen, the staff then started to build out the art, story, and world, which took over a year and a half on its own. The world they came up with took Asian and Hindu mythology and blended them together with science fiction, with the goal being to create something that hadn't really been seen before, and in turn, helped to make the project stand out, which it certainly did. You can say a lot about Asura's Wrath, but one of those things is that its long pre-production phase produced some aesthetically stunning stuff. Once they had the broader strokes of the story in place, a team of writers at CyberConnect 2 then fleshed things out further and identified where the big set pieces and battles would occur. CyberConnect 2 producers also felt that to go along with the atypical development, there should also be an atypical division of staff, which Hiroshi Matsuyama explained in that same interview with IGN Australia. We divided them into 3 teams, and each team would focus on a number of episodes, and there was a lot of going back and forth with different opinions and trying to figure out, how can we make this episode better? How can we make this really over the top? How can we make this a game that will appeal to a worldwide audience? At the top, we had the director, so it was almost like a pyramid, with the director at the top, and he would approve the many ideas, and it would go back and forth, and that's how we were able to come to how Asura's Wrath is now. For those that aren't familiar with this game, and judging by its sales, that might be most of you, it plays out like an anime series, complete with commercial bumpers, episode recaps, cliffhanger moments, and credits after every episode or level. Though it has its own unique quirks, Asura's structure is quite comparable to the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm series of games that CyberConnect 2 were also in the middle of pumping out, with both actually sharing quite a lot in terms of design if you take a closer look. Now, aside from that, I actually couldn't find all that much information on the game's core development, and certainly nothing that raised any red flags. With that said, since Asura's Wrath was the first title CyberConnect 2 worked on utilizing Unreal Engine 3, I'm sure there were some bouts of trial and error, but looking at the final product and how on a technical level it's pretty polished, I don't think that was a real problem either. Now, I know what you're gonna ask.
Hey, fat skeleton, where's the
steaming hot tea then. Why are we even talking about this?
Well kids, what we have here is a much more nuanced case than engine switches, money problems, or megalomaniacal bosses. I was able to glean some info from an anonymous source who was close to the project, and going by their account, Asura's Wrath's issues really came down to public perception, consumer expectations, and of course, absolutely disastrous DLC practices. Asura's Wrath's first teaser trailer from TGS 2010 was brief, but certainly made an impression. It promised bloodshed, anger, and epic scope, and since it was coming from Capcom, it was fair to assume it would deliver the same high-octane action and in-depth combat that the company was known for. And it wasn't just consumers either. Even the very first articles about the game's announcement seemed to echo this assumption, with Destructoid saying Capcom has partnered up with developer CyberConnect 2 on a new series called Asura's Wrath. The game is a heavy hack-and-slash game using the Unreal Engine 3. Characters can summon gigantic godlike creatures to battle massive armies. The key concept around this game, as described by director Seiji Shimoda, is that the game revolves around wrath, and that it's more about the experience rather than just playing it. The only hint there that this was not going to be typical action fare was the usage of the phrase, "it's more about the experience rather than just playing it" from Shimoda. But other than that, it seemed like it was very much going to be in Capcom's standard wheelhouse. When the game was first publicly announced, even Capcom USA themselves didn't have a good read on what Asura's Wrath would actually entail. Unlike most other Capcom productions, their USA branch wasn't initially part of the game's development, like at all, with the smaller Capcom Europe apparently taking the lead on Asura's international release. According to the source I spoke to, Capcom USA were initially only given the broader strokes from the European marketing team with a vertical slice/concept video along with a presentation by Capcom Europe staff explaining their take on the game. The European team had Asura pegged as a serious, intense, and mature title, so its main demographic should be mainstream audiences, 18 to 35-year-olds that enjoy God of War. My source said that despite this desire to target one of the most sought-after demographics, the marketing budget that had been allotted for it wasn't nearly enough to cast such a wide net. They estimated that the game would have needed 10 to 50 times as much money to have had a shot of success via that method, further reinforced by the fact that the game was a brand new IP and thus lacked any brand recognition. Sales aspirations would further dwindle when Capcom USA started receiving more and more advanced builds, and realized Asura's gameplay was far more unique than what they were expecting. While it did offer several styles of combat in which to engage enemies, none of them were as fleshed out as many other franchises in Capcom's back catalog, as the cutscenes and story were clearly the driving force behind the experience. These revelations took Capcom USA staff by surprise as they, and Europe, were planning on selling the game to the God of War crowd, which was now shaping up to be harder than initially thought. As development raged on, it became clear to Capcom USA that Asura was shaping up to be more of an interactive anime than a full-fledged action game, so the decision was made to take the remaining budget, which my source refers to as tiny, and steer the marketing towards the hardcore anime and comic book fan bases instead. Leading up to release, Capcom USA began advertising on anime web zones and anywhere else that would hit similar audiences, as they felt that was where the game's true demographic lay. With an 11th hour marketing pivot and a rapidly shrinking budget, Capcom USA had to find more outside-the-box approaches to getting the word out that Asura and his wrath were coming. If you were a frequent member of Capcom Unity back in the day, you might recall the Asura's Wrath Rage Cage. This was a physical booth that was set up during trade shows throughout 2011, where you could vent your frustrations out by screaming to your heart's content. And if you reached a certain volume level, you'd snag an Asura headband. Now, this was a pretty novel idea that played into the game's themes, with the only real issue being its incredibly unfortunate timing. the Rage Cage made its debut the exact same week as Mega Man Legend 3's cancellation. You can only imagine what the comment section at Capcom Unity was like. So as tense as things were between Capcom and their fans at that time, more surprises were coming, as the publisher had yet to reveal the thing that would go on to damage the reputation of a number of their releases during the late 7th gen era. Some of the most baffling, ill-advised DLC plans ever devised by man. When Asura's Wrath released on the PS3 and 360 on February 21st, 2012 in North America, and later that month in the rest of the world, players noticed two kinda awkward gaps in the story. This is because Capcom and CyberConnect 2 had decided to sell these missing chunks of narrative as DLC. They're not crucial, but in an era of growing DLC cynicism, it also wasn't the best look. Something far more egregious was the game's ending, or lack thereof. Once you clear Episode 18, you're informed that you need to unlock true Episode 18 by completing certain gameplay conditions. Once you've done that, you have to beat the entirety of Episode 18 again, which is almost identical save for a few snippets and a completely new final boss. The game then just abruptly ends with a title card explaining that the anger still remains, which was essentially telling players that this was not the definitive conclusion to Asura's very wrathful tale. This true ending, in fact, would be coming later, and unbeknownst to the public at the time, would not be free. Players would first have to wait for the pre-planned DLC rollout to occur, which kicked off, or down, with the two missing middle chapters, with the first launching on March 27th, a full month after the game's initial debut. This was episode 11.5, Forging Ahead, followed by episode 15.5, Defiance, a week later, with both costing players $1.99 each for roughly 12 minutes of gameplay. You might have missed the quotation marks in my voice around the word gameplay, but believe me, they're there. I added them because CyberConnect 2 envisioned both of these chapters as fully animated sequences, and contracted them out to two different studios, which resulted in mini-movies with some QTEs overlaid on top. While they're ultimately not that important and fairly inexpensive, it again set a rocky precedent for the game. Players then had to wait another full month until April 24th for the true ending to be made available, but its format was handled slightly differently, and some would say far worse. Chapter 4, Nirvana, was a bundle consisting of 4 episodes that cost an additional $6.99. Nowadays, players can get charged an extra $50 or more for deluxe editions and season passes, but back then, people were channeling their own wrath about it costing $7 for the real ending. During an interview in the Asura's Wrath official Complete Works book, the creators behind the game fielded several questions, with one of them being why they handled the game's ending the way they did. Hiroshi Matsuyama answered first by saying, "The idea for this was the way that sometimes after a drama or anime series ends its run on TV, the following episodes will be done as movies or OVA. That was the pattern, so the game itself is complete the way it is." Asura's Wrath's director, Seiji Shimoda, also added that, "First of all, we decided to finish it up at 18 episodes, and then once you've been satisfied with that, there's Nirvana. For example, with a drama shown on TV, as a general rule, you have to wait 1 week to watch 1 episode, right? I think that this week also gives you time to imagine what will happen next in the story. Also, when the story's finished, we leave a kind of hook there to give the player the sense that there's something beyond that ending. And just when we fan that feeling of anticipation, making you wonder when we'll do it and how it will end, there's Nirvana. Right now, I think there's a time for having people wait." Now hey, that's a cool idea, as it really taps into the tension of waiting to see a story being definitively concluded. The problem is that you don't typically get charged for watching a broadcast television series, and then pay more again to see how it all ends. For an added bit of context about the state of the video game industry in 2012, episodic gaming was starting to take off thanks to the Telltale's The Walking Dead, which succeeded in offering a new style of video game content to the masses.
God damn.
So initially you might think it odd that players and critics expressed displeasure with Asura's approach to DLC, but then you recall that it was also a $60 release, with an initially secret upsell at the end. If you wanted the full breadth of the story, its main drawing point, you're actually paying $71, predating today's modern AAA prices by more than a decade. To many, however, it was understandably more the principle of the thing, hiding that a sizable chunk of story content was being intentionally left out of the main package. But wait, there's more! We can't forget the Street Fighter crossover DLC, which amounted to 2 insane drag-out battles against Ryu and Akuma that were made available by mid-May, cost $1.99 each, and admittedly were amazing. While these non-canon extra fights absolutely made sense to include as post-launch DLC, a good percentage of gamers and critics did not take kindly that a full-price title's ending was locked behind a paywall, and it really didn't help matters that this was happening around the exact same time as another, arguably even worse Capcom DLC fiasco. Which, if you saw my Cross-Tekken episode, contained DLC plans that Capcom USA actively fought against. And lost. The backlash behind this DLC strategy, the game's general mixed critical reception, and the fact that retail stores were hesitant to stock it on shelves meant Asura's Wrath wound up being one of the lowest performing Capcom games of that year, if not the lowest. Oh wait, that's actually not accurate at all. Asura's first week NPD sales painted a grim picture, as across both the PS3 and 360, it only shifted 36,000 copies, just narrowly beating out that month's other financial dud, EA's reboot of Syndicate. It should be noted that Asura did release in the last week of February, so it most likely sold more than that in March, but it didn't crack the top 10 of NPD sales in either month, so yeah. In Japan, where it should have done much better, it only did marginally better, just a smidge above 36,000 copies in its first week, eventually racking up 65,000 units total. For a project that was in development for approximately 5 years, it can't be understated how dire these numbers truly are. Since then, there has been nary even the vaguest hint of a sequel, port, or remaster from either Capcom or CyberConnect 2, as the two companies never collaborated again. It doesn't seem as though there's any bad blood per se, it's just that CyberConnect 2 pretty much went all in on anime games from then on out, and only recently has been putting out some all-original titles. Despite all of this, Asura's Wrath has slowly cultivated a small but passionate fanbase, mostly this guy, who appreciated what it was attempting to do, which in all honesty was ahead of its time. The gaming industry was still being flooded by waves and waves of Call of Duty and Gears clones circa 2012, and as unique as it was, Asura's Wrath just wasn't able to punch through all that white noise. If something like this was released in today's gaming landscape, which has more variety than ever, it might have had a better chance at resonating. If you're curious, you can still download and play Asura's Wrath on the newest, fanciest Xboxes, where you can regularly get it on deep discount, along with all the DLC. Likewise, if you're on PlayStation, you can stream it via PlayStation Plus, where you can't actually access any of the DLC at all, so maybe just forget that last one. Finally, if you consider yourself a fan of Asura's Wrath, Darkstalkers, or Power Stone, I do have good news. Capcom's got you covered with a variety of costumes representing those series in Street Fighter V. If you know of any other regrettable rage-powered projects that burn brightly and briefly, let me know in the comments below or over on my Twitter. See you next time, and thanks for watching!